Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. So I apologize for the length of time it takes to get everything set up, but I just thought it was important the first couple of lessons to have some visual aids. The topic that we're going to take, as you all know, is we're going to do a commentary on Kitab, at-Tawheed. And the topic can be somewhat decent at times. It can be something which is highly concentrated and complex, and we're going to try to simplify it and make it as accessible as possible. But at the same time, I think the visual aids will help with that accessibility, making the topic accessible. And I forgot to mention, as always, thank you all for coming and making time in your Monday evening for the Monday meeting. So let's look at what we're going to try to look at tonight in the first part of the introduction. So we're going to try to look at four things. Can everybody see that? I'll take that as a yes. Yes. So the first thing we want to talk about is why. Why this topic? We could talk about so many things. We have talked about so many things. Why this topic specifically? Why is it worth talking about? Why is it worthy of talking about? Number two, what is a Tawheed? What does that word even mean? Number three, what are its categories? And last but not least, what is worship, which is related to one of the most important, or the most important category from the categories of a Tawheed, and the whole reason why we were created in the first place. So those are the four things we want to touch on today. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Let's look at the first one. So there are a number of reasons why this topic is worthy of our utmost attention, why we should spend time studying and learning the topic of Tawheed, learning it in detail, and then revisiting what we have learned, not treating it like many other subjects where we learn it once and then we kind of move on and say, I've been there, done that, I'm not going to do it again. Tawheed is a topic we should not just learn it and learn it well, but revisit it. And one of the reasons why is because it is the most fundamental and important Islamic tenet. There is nothing more important in the religion of Islam than at-Tawheed. And I want to mention some indications that this is the most important tenet. One of them is that this was the primary and foremost focus of al-Anbiya wa Rusul, of the prophets and messengers. And when they came, the first thing they called to was a Tawheed. The thing that they called to and gave the greatest emphasis was at-Tawheed. And the one constant in the messages of all of the prophets and the messengers was at-Tawheed. Were there some disparities between what the messengers called to, what was in their law, what they taught? Certainly. Some of them legalized certain things that other prophets made illegal. Some of them had in their messages that which was not contained in the messages of others. But one thing that was constant and consistent amongst the prophets and messengers was the call to at-Tawheed. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, supporting this and proving this, He says, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنْ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. That comes to us from Surah An-Nahl, the 16th chapter, verse number 36, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we have certainly appointed in every religious community a messenger and ordered him to proclaim that there's no deity worthy of worship Allah alone and shun the false deities. We also have the ayah from Surah Al-Anbiya, the 21st chapter, verse number 25, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن قَبْلَكَ مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا نُوحِي إِلَيْهِ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا فَاعْبُدُونِ. And we have not sent before you, Muhammad, a messenger, except that we ordered him to proclaim there is no deity worthy of worship except me, Allah, So worship me. That comes, I said, 21, 25. So if you notice in these two ayat, and there are many ayat like this, if you notice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that the prophets اهتموا بالتوحيد غاية الاهتمام, that they focused on and emphasized and stressed the Tawheed tremendously or immensely. And they are our qudwa, they are our example, our role model. So if the prophets were that concerned with the Tawheed, we should be equally concerned with it. Also, we know it's important because of this concern, because the prophets of Allah would never concern themselves with something trivial. So the fact that they concern themselves with it tells us it's not trivial. What else tells us that it's the most fundamental and important Islamic tenet? One of the things that tells us, yeah, you want me to get out of your way? So one of the things that tells us that it's important is the fact that you as a Muslim, any human being, they could fail to observe all the tenets of Islam. They could be negligent in every aspect of Islam, but uphold the Tawheed and succeed. They could attain salvation. Even though there were aspects of Islam that they neglected, they could succeed as long as they upheld the Tawheed. Conversely, if a person upheld every tenet of Islam, you name it, they prayed, they fasted, they gave charity, they embodied the exalted standard of Islamic character, they were kind to their neighbor, you name the Islamic tenet, something that Islam gives importance to and calls to, they did all of that, but they didn't uphold the Tawheed. They wouldn't be successful. They wouldn't achieve salvation. Allah says in the Quran, He says, وَلَقَدْ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ وَإِلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ لَإِنْ أَشْرَكْتَ لَيَحْبَطَنَّ عَمَلُكَ وَلَتَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. He says in Surah Al-Zumar, which is the 39th surah, verse number 65, He says, and it has been revealed to you, Muhammad, as it was revealed to those who came before you, that if you violated the Tawheed, if you associated partners with Allah, all of your deeds would be vain. They would be nullified. And you would be in the hereafter from the losers. You wouldn't be successful. You would miss out on salvation. Even if you did all the good things, if you violated Tawheed, you wouldn't be successful. He also says in Surah An-Nisa, the 4th chapter, verse number 48, He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرْ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Allah does not forgive the sin of a shirk, associating partners with Him, violating the Tawheed. He doesn't forgive it when we violate Tawheed and die upon that violation. But He'll forgive other sins to whomever He pleases. We also have a very famous hadith collected by Muslim on the Abu Hurairah, in which the Prophet spoke about the first people who will be judged on the day of resurrection. And He mentioned a martyr, a person who fought in the way of Allah and died fighting in the way of Allah. And He mentioned an alim. He mentioned a person who was a person of scholarship, who learned the deen and taught it. But not only this, he learned the Quran and he taught it to others and recited it in the day and by night. And the last person, or that he mentioned, sallallahu, was a wealthy philanthropist, a person who was given lots of wealth by Allah and he would spend it in the way of Allah. But all of these three men who will be the first to be judged, look at all the good deeds they did. But they did those good deeds ostentatiously. They did those good deeds seeking the admiration and praise of people for what they did. The martyr sought to be called brave. And the scholar sought to be called alim, knowledgeable. And when he taught the Quran and recited, he wanted to be called qari. Oh, how beautiful he recites. And the philanthropist, he wanted to be called kareem. He wanted to be called generous. They did it for other than Allah's sake. Even look, all these good deeds and piety didn't avail them. Allah will order that they be dragged on their face and thrown into hell. All these good deeds, piety, did nothing for them because they violated the greatest fundamental, at-Tawheed, and al-Ikhlas, right? Purity of intention and monotheism. But it's also important, this topic, because the fundamentals of Islam are something that the Muslims are supposed to constantly revisit and revise. Constantly learn and relearn. And that's because of their ahamiyah, that's because of their importance, and that's because that's what we're going to be held accountable for. There's a famous hadith, and some of you probably know it, most of you probably know it, the hadith of Ahmad, Abu Dawud, at-Tirmidhi, on the authority of Al-Bara ibn Azib. And that's the hadith where the Prophet described to his companions what he called fitnat al-qabr. Anybody know what fitnat al-qabr is? What is fitnat al-qabr? Fitnat al-qabr. The test of the grave, the trial of the grave, meaning you'll be asked 3 questions in the grave. And those 3 questions, depending on how you answer them, will determine whether you're going to be from the people of paradise, the people of hellfire. Those questions, do you think they're about al-fara'id, the rules of inheritance? Do you think they're about the ruling of wiping over socks? No. We're asked about the most fundamental beliefs of Islam. Man Rabbuk, who is your Lord? Ma Dinuk, what is your religion? And what do you say about this man who was sent to you? So again, these fundamentals, the first one being Man Rabbuk, your Lord. Who is your Lord? Monotheism, at-Tawheed. The first thing we're going to be asked about in the grave that's going to determine whether we succeed or fail to succeed is at-Tawheed. So this is a fundamental which we should know. We should inculcate. We should embody it. And it should be a part of our being such that when these questions get asked, we answer them what? Tilqa'i, by Allah's permission and will. Number 3, another reason why this is so important is because this fundamental is currently under siege. This fundamental is currently under siege. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by this fundamental being currently under siege? This fundamental of at-Tawheed is under siege, and when I say under siege, I don't mean by non-Muslims. It's not the non-Muslims who are attacking at-Tawheed. It's some Muslims. You actually have prominent personalities in the Muslim community, people who are considered authorities in Islam, who are actively belittling the importance of at-Tawheed, attacking, vilifying, and discrediting the people who prioritize at-Tawheed, and purposely misrepresenting at-Tawheed. And I'll give you one example out of Ujala. There's a very popular speaker who promotes the idea, he currently promotes the idea, that calling on the people who are buried in graves, regardless of where they're buried, when you call upon them, calling upon them and asking them for material or spiritual needs is not shirk. It's not a violation of at-Tawheed, and it's not an act of shirk, polytheism, or idolatry, unless the person who does so believes that they have godlike powers and or considers them a deity. He basically takes them as a god. If he doesn't do either of these 2 things, even if he prays to a person in the grave, he hasn't violated Tawheed. He hasn't committed a shirk. And he supports this with the hadith of Al-Bukhari and Muslim on the authority of Umar radiallahu anhu, in which he said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَىٰ. He said, actions are but by intentions, and every person shall receive as a recompense for his actions precisely what he intended. He's saying if he doesn't intend to take this person in the grave as a deity, then he hasn't committed a shirk, because that wasn't his intention. Even if he did an act of worship and offered it to that deity. Okay. Sounds thoughtful, doesn't it? Sounds well-reasoned and well-thoughtful, like he really thought this out, and he's really trying to be very daqiq and careful in determining who actually committed shirk and who didn't commit shirk. And in reality, as well thought out as it sounds, it's absolutely what? It's absolutely false. But a lot of people, they feel because he mentioned a hadith and said, look, if these people didn't have this intention, the Prophet is saying that they're not guilty of anything. You can do a wrong thing with the right intention and you won't be guilty. This is how he interpreted it, and they understand it accordingly and accept it. So I want to digress and respond to this because I think it's very important. One of the reasons why I want to do this class is because of these type of shubuhat, because of these types of spacious arguments and dubious assertions that people are making and confusing a lot of people just because they have degrees, they have high-level degrees, and they quote a hadith to support what they say, even though what the hadith they quote doesn't support what they say. So let's take a closer look at that. So we did all this, right? We did that. All right, this fundamental is under siege. All right. So let's look at some of the answers or responses to what this person said. The first thing is I want to ask you guys a serious question. Suppose I had a newborn at my house. And I'm sitting there with the newborn. And I say to the newborn, go over there and turn on the light. I say, go turn on the light. What's wrong with you? I start shouting at the newborn, go and turn on the light. And you're sitting there observing them. What would you think?
Crazy.
One possibility is I'm insane. The other one possibility is I'm insane. Why? Because a newborn can't go, won't even understand the command, let alone have the ability to go and what? And turn on the light. Right? So either I'm insane, or I believe that this baby has what? Has powers beyond what? Beyond what is normally the capability of a child of that age, etc. Right? So if I ask someone to do something, either I believe they have the power to do it, or what? Or I'm insane. You guys see that? Or I'm insane. So when people ask the dead in the grave, do this for me, do that for me, then don't we have to draw the same conclusion? Either they believe the person in the grave can do it, or they're what? Or they're insane. You guys agree with that? Does that make sense? Is everybody on the same page with me? All right, let's move on from that then. Let's go to the next point then. So now ask yourself this question. If I believe that the person in the grave will fulfill my request, that they can do it, how will they do it? How will they do it? So, for example, if a person asked another person in the grave, a deceased person in the grave, they said, "Oh, person in the grave, please make my wife fertile. Help us have a child. Oh, person in the grave, I'm thirsty. Give me drink. Oh, person in the grave, I'm hungry. Give me food. Oh, person in the grave, I'm poor. Give me wealth." Ask yourself, that person who says that, and they believe that the person in the grave is going to answer, how do they believe they're going to answer? Is there any connection between the dead person and the things that they're asking? Are they present and physically able to take wealth from one place and bring it, food from one place and bring it, water from one place and bring it? Are they able to do that? Are they in a position to do that? So how are they going to do it? They would have to do it by either speaking it into existence or willing it into existence. And what is that? That's a godlike power, isn't it? So doesn't the action show that the person believes that the person has a godlike power? You guys see that? Perfect. Next one. How exactly will the deceased person, okay, let's say this person in the grave is not in my proximity. I'm not standing at his grave. The person in the grave is in what? Is in another place. The person in the grave is in another place. For example, they're buried in India, for example. And the person says, oh person, whoever is named, Sayyid Fulan, Saint so-and-so, do this for me, do that for me. How exactly is that person who's not in our immediate proximity going to what? How are they going to hear the request? If a person calls upon them and they're not in their immediate proximity, that means that they believe that that person has the ability to hear regardless of the distance of the sound. That there's no limit to their ability to perceive sound. And what is that? It's a godlike power. Is that not so? All right, one last point on this. And that is that in Islam, and this is very important, what is a deity in Islam? What is an ilah in Islam? What is a ma'bood in Islam? It's any object to whom worship is directed, irrespective whether or not that deity requests it, is pleased with it, is aware of it. If you direct worship to anything in Islam, we call that an ilah, we call it a ma'bood. Even if you yourself don't intend to worship that deity, and this is very important, and this is why we need to study these things. Because if we understand these things, like this speaker couldn't have possibly understood it, he never would have said what he said. Is that in Islam, you don't have to intend to commit shirk. If you offer an act of worship to something or someone other than Allah, you've committed shirk. Whether or not you're a mushrik or not, that's a different discussion. But the act that you did is called shirk. It's called associating partners with Allah. And I'll give you the proof. Let's contemplate for a moment the hadith of at-Tabari rahimahullah ta'ala in his tafsir on the authority of Adi bin Hatim. Adi bin Hatim, he was a Christian who became a Muslim. He was a devout Christian who became a Muslim. And one day he came upon the Prophet ﷺ reciting from Surah At-Tawbah. Surah At-Tawbah verse 9, the ninth chapter, verse number 31. He came across him reciting from this chapter. And in that verse that the Prophet recited, or in that chapter when he came across verse number 31, he said, اتَّخَذُوا أَحْبَارَهُمْ وَرُهْبَانَهُمْ أَرْبَابًا مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. He says they have taken, meaning the Christians and Jews, have taken their rabbis and their monks as deities or lords besides Allah. So Adi, who had previously been a Christian, he took umbrage at that. He didn't agree with that. He said, oh, Messenger of Allah, لَسْنَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ. Come on, Rasulullah. We did a lot of things, but we didn't worship our priests and our rabbis and our monks. We didn't do that. Come on, Rasulullah. That's too much. So the Prophet ﷺ responded and he said, أَلَمْ يُحَرِّمُوا مَا حَلَّ اللَّهُ فَتُحَرِّمُونَ وَيُحِلُّ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ فَتُحِلُّونَ. He said, isn't it the case that whenever they would declare illegal something which Allah had legalized, you would declare it illegal? And whenever they declared lawful what Allah had declared illegal, you would declare it lawful. Didn't you do that? Didn't you obey them in that? He said, Bala ya Rasulullah. He said, yes, certainly, we did that. He said, Tilka ibadatuhum. He said, in that way, you worship them. Like, tell me how this hadith shows. Somebody please tell me how this hadith shows that you don't have to intend to commit shirk to still be guilty of it. How does it show that? Nope. Should I say it again? And you got to stay with me? You got to stay with me on this. You got to get this. And this is why we're doing this, because we have to learn and we have to have in our hearts the knowledge that repels all of these doubts and misconceptions and dubious assertions that people make about at-Tawheed at this time when a lot of people, they don't have that knowledge. They don't have that understanding. And as a consequence, they're falling for it. They're falling into it and believing, yeah, I could go to a grave with my uncle who's into that, And I could do this to show him respect and make him feel good about what he does, and I could participate with him. And I wouldn't be sinful because I have no intention. I don't even believe in this nonsense. Let's go back and look at the hadith, and you guys stay with me. So Adi bin Hatim, he was a Christian, as we said. Devout Christian who became a Muslim. And he came across the Prophet reciting from Surah at-Tawbah, verse number 31, the 9th surah, 9th chapter, verse number 31. And the Prophet read in that verse, he said, اتَّخَذُوا أَحْبَارَهُمْ وَرُهْبَانَهُمْ أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. So he said, they, meaning the Christians and Jews, took their rabbis and their monks as gods besides Allah, or lords besides Allah. Everybody follow me so far? So what is Allah basically saying? They violated at-Tawheed and committed a shirk. You guys with me? Mumtaz. So what did Adi say? He said, Lasna na'buduhum. Come on, Rasulullah. Come on, we didn't worship them. So right now, in his mind, whatever they did wasn't what? Wasn't shirk. He's like, I never intended to worship them. That's basically what Adi is saying. It was never our intention to what? To worship them. We never worshiped them. In his mind, it never happened. You guys with me? So the Prophet said, didn't you, whenever they made something legal that Allah made illegal, you legalized it. And whenever they made something illegal, which Allah had made legal, you made it illegal. Didn't you do that? He said, Bala ya Rasulullah. He said, yes, we did. What did the Prophet say? Tilka ibadatuhum. He said, in this way, you worship them. So what is the Prophet saying? Whether you intended to or not, you did what? You worship them by doing this act, by obeying them in something that contradicted what Allah said. That type of obedience is only for who? Allah. So when you gave them that level of obedience, that's an act of ibadah which you offer to something other than Allah. That constitutes a violation of Tawheed or shirk. You guys see that? So what that tells you is you don't have to have the intention to take something as a deity if you offer an act of worship to it, even unwittingly. What have you done? Shirk. Does that make you a mushrik? Well, that depends on other factors. That's a different discussion. But the act itself is called what? Shirk. You guys see that? Does it make sense to everybody? Yeah. All right, somebody repeat it back to me. Is this like the ayah la tuqaddimu bayna yaday Allahi wa rasulihi? No, I think it's different because it's kind of like that in the sense that it's telling you that you have to obey Allah and His Messenger and not put your opinions above Allah and His Messenger. But if you did that, if you took someone and whatever they said, you gave it priority over what Allah said, you gave them your absolute obedience. That act of giving absolute obedience is an act of worship. If you offer that to other than Allah, whether you do it wittingly or unwittingly, you're guilty of a shirk.
You follow them in ignorance.
Yeah, you follow them in ignorance, but you're obeying them in a way, at a level that is only befitting to Allah. So we're going to see what is a Tawheed. We're going to see. You're going to see why, if you offer something that's exclusively the right of Allah to other than Allah, that's what we call a shirk. So who can repeat it back to me? How is this? Who can explain this one? This last one. In Islam, a deity is an object of worship. Is an object worshipped, even if you don't consider yourself to be worshipping. Who can explain it back to me using the hadith of Adi?
You want to repeat it back to you, or you want me to
explain it? Summarize it. Yeah, summarize it as you understood it. Yes.
So basically, he was unaware, or he claimed that they had not committed shirk. And then Rasulullah said, well, didn't they legalize what Allah had made illegal? And then you guys accepted it legal.
MashaAllah.
And he said, yes. And then, well, didn't they make illegal what Allah had made legal? And you guys went ahead and made it illegal. He said, yeah. He said, well, through that or like that, you would worship them.
Wow.
But basically, if Allah says something, that's supreme. That's it.
Hey.
And so if you're going to go now even looking for something in contrast to that, Allahu Alam, but and beware if you find it, because if it doesn't align with what Allah said, and then you go ahead and give that your devotion, meaning you follow that, as opposed to what you know that Allah said, then you're putting that now as your ilah.
And is it necessary that you do that wittingly? This is the question. Do you have to do it wittingly?
No.
That's the point. You don't have to do it wittingly. You don't have to do it intentionally. Intention does not negate the fact that the act is an act of shirk. What the person is saying is that you're not committing a shirk unless you intend to commit a shirk. Because he says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى. But if that's the case, would Adi and the Christians, would they have committed a shirk? When he says, لَسْنَا نَعْبُدُهُ, come on, Ya Rasulullah, we weren't worshiping them. In their mind, they weren't doing it. It wasn't their intention. But they were doing it because that act of absolute obedience is something which is the exclusive right of Allah. Does everybody get that?
What do you mean by absolute obedience? So let me ask a question.
Sure.
So, like nowadays, most of the countries don't apply Islamic law, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you follow the law in the country, you're committing shirk, right?
No.
Why?
We're not talking about absolute obedience when you follow Allah, for example, like the light is red, you have to stop.
No, I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
I'm talking about stuff that is like in Sharia.
Like what?
Like the marriage, or like punishing someone who steals, or somebody who kills someone else.
So the common people punish them? The common people punish them?
What?
The common people punish them. Yeah, the rulers do that, right? So if a ruler, and I want to go off track.
I don't want to.
But
like it's the same idea, right?
If a person gives, irrespective of who it is, if a person gives absolute obedience to someone or something other than Allah, then they have worshipped them. Allah is saying it in the Quran. Do you follow me? Or?
I'm not sure what you mean by absolute obedience.
Absolute obedience means if they contradict Allah, you'll still obey them. Did they not legalize what Allah made illegal, and you legalized it? He said, Bela, Ya Rasulullah. He said, yeah, we did that. That's absolute obedience. Absolute means whatever they say goes. Who has the right that whatever they say, you'll do it? Who has that right? Shaykh Muhammad. That's it. So if you give that to someone other than Allah, then what have you done? You've given something which is exclusively the right of Allah, other than Allah. That's the meaning of the shirk, as we're going to see. That's the meaning of the shirk. Now the question that you asked was, okay, if a person living in a Muslim country where they don't,
even in Muslim countries they don't apply that.
Whether they apply it or not, and the specific condition of an individual Muslim living in a Muslim country where they don't apply the law of Allah, that specific Muslim situation is something different from what we're talking about. What I need you to do, everybody to do, is differentiate between, because I said this earlier. I said, the person who did this, are they a mushrik? I said, that's a different one. That's a different discussion.
Yeah, I know that.
But the act itself of giving absolute obedience to anything or anyone besides Allah is an act of shirk. Does that person become a mushrik? Totally different discussion, because there's a lot of conditions that have to be, a lot of hurdles that have to be crossed to make that judgment. But the act itself, I'm going to ask you, Shaykh Muhammad, do you believe that absolute obedience is the exclusive right of Allah?
Yeah.
Then what is a shirk? تَسْوِيَةُ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِاللَّهِ فِي شَيْءٍ مِنْ خَصَائِصِ اللَّهِ. It is when you equate anything besides Allah with Allah and something which is specific to Allah. So if you say that, or exclusive to Allah, if you say that absolute obedience is exclusive to Allah, then when you give it to other than Allah, you've committed a shirk by definition. That's it. Does it answer your question? Or?
If I may say something. So basically you're talking about the laws of the land. And anybody who would say, okay, I'm a law-abiding citizen. Now they're committing shirk. But what the difference is here, am I on the right track? Right? So a law-abiding citizen, just because they accept the laws of the land, now they're automatically committing shirk. But what it is that as long as the laws of the land don't go against what Allah said, then that law-abiding citizen is not committing shirk. Now, if the laws of the land go against what Allah said, now that law-abiding citizen, of course, is following the laws of the land, even if it goes against what Allah said. Now he's given absolute, you understand, the right to the land. And I don't know if that's clear. But as long as it's not going to interfere with your Islam, it's okay to follow the laws. Like the speed limit, the red light, you understand? But if the laws now come to interfere with your Islam, they're going to say something other than what Allah said or different from what Allah said, then you go with what Allah said. And if you choose the other one, then you've chosen something other than Allah. And Allah knows best.
Before I come to you, Sheikh Muhammad, is it clear? Or I don't get the sense that you've been answered satisfactorily.
Yeah, so you following a law in a country like
we're not talking about following the law. Pay attention to what the Prophet said. He said, أَلَا يُحَرِّمُونَ مَا أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ فَتُحَرِّمُونَ. He's speaking specifically about Allah giving a law. And the priests or rabbis or the monks changing the law to contradict what Allah said.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
You know, my thing, I don't want to give it like in one of the countries, okay?
Okay.
They decided that the inheritance laws to change.
Okay.
Okay. You don't have a choice as a citizen other than follow the law of the country.
But again, are you asking me about the ruling of the act of changing the law? Or are you asking about the ruling of the person?
No, the person.
But again, we're not talking about that. This is the thing. And that's why I'm saying these masail, I need you to be with me. And because they are very fine and delicate and precise. So stay within the circle of or the sphere of what I'm talking about. I said, does that person become a mushrik? Because you said, well, that would make him a mushrik. That's a totally different one.
I'm not saying he's committing shirk. I'm not saying he's a mushrik. But so basically what I'm saying is, you can do like inqab al-qalb and هذا أضعف الإيمان and you leave it at that, right?
The act itself, the act itself of legalizing or accepting the legality of something which Allah made illegal, what is that?
Yeah, that's just
shirk. That's it.
This is what I'm saying.
And then the person who does it, the person who does it, is he a mushrik? That depends. Because he could be what? He could be what? Mukrah. He could be coerced.
Yes.
And in Islam, coercion is one of those things that's an exception.
And he can be ignorant. And
yes. Yes.
Okay.
So what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the person or the act? Are we all on the same page? Absolute obedience to Allah is an act of? Any other questions about that? Any other questions about that? None. For sure. Right. Let's go on. What is a Tawheed? What time is it anyway, sir?
8:25.
8:25, okay. We're going to have to shut it down here in a few minutes. Okay, let's try to get through. All right. What is a Tawheed? Tawheed is an Arabic word. And the language of the Arabs, Tawheed, it comes from the verb wahada yuwahidu, which means to make something one or to make something singular. Everybody understand that? So what's the meaning of Tawheed in the language? What's the meaning of Tawheed in the language? Make something one, make it singular. Like what about the legal meaning, the Islamic terminological meaning? It is ifradullahi bima yakhtassu bihi. Ifradullahi bima yakhtassu bihi. In Islamic terms, it means to make Allah the sole recipient of everything which is exclusive to Him. anything, everything which is exclusive to Allah, like what? Absolute obedience. We make him the exclusive recipient of that. As-sujood, as-salat, fasting, any act of worship, and other things, as we're going to see beyond acts of worship, they're exclusive to Allah. We only give them to who? To Allah. Okay. Is that pretty clear? All right, let's see. Now, remember what I told you earlier. I said that there's a lot of people who are attacking this fundamental. And so every time there's an attack on anything that we're going to talk about, there's a dubious argument, a spacious assertion, we're going to talk about it. Because I want you to understand in detail the truth and how to refute the falsehood. Okay? But, so what's the shubha as it relates to this definition that we gave of at-Tawheed, or the term at-Tawheed? They say, the word Tawheed has not appeared in the Quran or the Hadith literature. This terminology is an invention of latter-day scholarship, and by extension, the concept is an innovation of bid'ah. You guys understand the shubha? It's saying Tawheed, somebody made that up. It's not really from the religion of Islam. It's something that's been introduced into Islam, and therefore it's an innovation. It's something that we should not even talk about or consider or study. What's the response? Number one, the word has appeared in the Hadith literature. It is something which the Prophet ﷺ talked about and mentioned as a Hadith. There's a Hadith collected by at-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala on authority of Jabir ibn Abdullah, and it's a Sahih Hadith, authentic Hadith, in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said, يُعَذَّبُ نَاسٌ مِنْ أَهْلِ التَّوْحِيدِ يُعَذَّبْ نَاسٌ مِنْ أَهْلِ التَّوْحِيدِ فِي النَّارِ حَتَّى يَكُونُوا حُمَمًا, he said. He said that there will be some people from Ahl at-Tawheed, from the people of monotheism, Islamic monotheism, at-Tawheed, using the word at-Tawheed. They'll be burned or punished in the fire until they become burnt like coals, the Prophet said. Authentic hadith where the Prophet used what word? What word did he use? At-Tawheed. So what's the first response? Somebody says you're one of those people studying Kitab at-Tawheed. Come on, Tawheed was made up. What's your first response? It's in the hadith. Ahsant. But second response, in addition to using the actual word at-Tawheed, which is a verbal noun. What's a verbal noun in English? Like a gerund, like running, reading, writing. That's what Tawheed is in Arabic. But the gerund in our language, in English, always has what? Has a verb that goes with it. Is that so? So for example, running has run and ran, right? Is that not so? And reading has read and read. Is that not so? Mumtaz. Same thing in Arabic. They have a tawheed. They have wahada yuwahidu. And the Prophet used that verb, wahada yuwahidu. He used it in the hadith. That's the hadith collected by Bukhari. On the authority of Ibn Abbas, that when the Prophet was getting ready to send Mu'ad to Yemen, he told him, إِنَّكَ تَقْدَمُ على قوم من أهل الكتاب فليكن أول ما تدعوهم إليه أن يوحدوا الله تعالى. He said, O Mu'ad, you're going to come across a people from the people of Scripture. So let the first thing that you call them to be أن يوحدوا الله, that they make Allah one. Using the verb from which gerund or which verbal noun? At-Tawheed. So if I say running or if I say ran, are they really different? They're not different. So it appeared in the hadith, the actual word of Tawheed, and the word is derived from wahada yuwahidu, also came in the hadith. But number 3, the word of Tawheed was also used by the Prophet's companions. But I'm going to ask you a question. A term used by the Prophet's companions, ishtahara isti'maluhu. It was common knowledge they were using this term. Other companions heard them using it. And none of them disapproved of it. What's that indication of? It's okay to use it. It's good to use it because the companions would not agree upon falsehood, number 1. And also, they wouldn't accept a term being attributed to religion that's not from it. So in the hadith, one example is Jabir. He used the word at-Tawheed in the hadith, the famous hadith where he described the Prophet's final pilgrimage, his farewell pilgrimage. Long hadith collected by Muslim. In that hadith, Jabir, he mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, he put on his ihram and prepared himself for the Hajj at a place called Al-Bayda. And then after he got prepared, he got up on his camel. And he made the camel stand up erect. And when the camel stood up erect, the Prophet said, Jabir, he said, Ahalla bit-Tawheed. Ahalla bit-Tawheed. He proclaimed at-Tawheed through his talbiyah, Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik, Labbaik la sharika laka, Labbaik. So Jabir called that talbiyah that the Prophet pronounced, he called it al-Ihlal bit-Tawheed. He called it proclaiming at-Tawheed. Who used that? Who used that phrase? Jabir ibn Abdullah, one of the Prophet's companions. He wasn't the only one either. Ibn Abbas, there's a hadith or a athar collected by Al-Qurtubi, Al-Alusi, As-Samarqandi, and Al-Nasa'i, and also Ibn Adil, in which Ibn Abbas, he said, كل العبادة في القرآن فهو التوحيد. He said, every mention of the word al-ibadah or every mention of worship in the Quran is a reference to at-Tawheed. Who used that word? Ibn Abbas. So Jabir and Ibn Abbas and none of the other companions disagreed with them or disapproved of what they said. But let's go now to another response. How many responses so far did we do? 3. Let's go to 4. The concept of Allah. It's the concept itself. Is this concept of Allah being one, is it something new? Is it something unprecedented? Something baseless? No, it's something in the Quran. In fact, it is the Quran. The Quran is full of Allah saying that He is one. وَإِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ هُوَ الرَّحْمَنُ الرَّحِيمُ. And your God is one God. There is no God except Him. And He is the most merciful, the most compassionate. That's Surah Al-Baqarah. Let me see what ayah is that. Actually, I think I have the ayat here. Yeah, it's 2:163. Sorry, 2:163. And there are lots of ayat like this. I don't want to give too many because we want to close here shortly. Very good. Very good reference. You also have the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَآمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرُسُلِهِ وَلَا تَقُولُوا ثَلَاثَةٌ إِنْتَهُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِنَّمَا اللَّهُ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ سُبْحَانَهُ وَإِنْ يَكُنْ لَهُ وَلَدٌ. Right? So he said in that verse, he said, believe in Allah and His Messenger and do not say Trinity. Do not say three gods. Cease. It is better for you. God is only one God. There is no God besides Him. Subhanahu. Glory be to Him that He should have a son. Ila akhirihi, from the ayat. Quran is full of those ayat where Allah says He's one. So the concept is established in the Quran. I'm going to ask you, is it the concept that's important or the phrase that we use to reference it? The concept. And the concept is something no one can deny. The Quran is full of it. So the concept, as Ibn al-Qayyim used to say, al-alfaz qawalib al-ma'ani, that the terms are just a vessel for the meaning. So people can argue and split hairs about the word Tawheed. Is it a basis for it? The concept of the Tawheed is something well established in the Quran, let alone the Hadith. Last but not least, both the term and the concept have been mentioned and propagated by the scholars throughout history. So from the beginning of time, we talked about the companions. Up until the present day, the scholars have been using this term, at-Tawheed. To the point that some of the early scholars from the early period, they actually titled their books using this term, at-Tawheed. And these are books that were famous, were read, and were taught for centuries. And nobody rejected. So for example, nobody opposed or contradicted or voiced any disagreement or disapproval of the use of this term throughout the century. This is a recent development. So for example, you have Ibn Khuzaymah, who has a book called Kitab, at-Tawheed. He died 311 after Hijrah, early on in Islam. You also have Ibn Mandah, who also has a book called Kitab, at-Tawheed, died 395, early on in what? In the history of Islam. Not a single person said, hey, where's this term come from? This is new. We never heard it before. Because they had heard of it. They did know at-Tawheed, not just the concept, but the actual term itself. All right? What time is it now? Sorry.
8:34.
All right, what I'm going to do, I know we didn't get everything, but I'd rather for us to review and really have a good understanding of what we covered as opposed to try to jam everything down your throat and then we leave and we don't understand anything. So let's review. We said why this topic, and we mentioned 3 reasons why this topic. Who can give me one? 3 reasons why this topic. Most fundamental and important Islamic tenet. Who can tell me something? Give me one evidence to support it's the most fundamental and important Islamic tenet. Give me one proof. One supporting evidence for that. Tafadhal, Hamza.
Without Tawheed, you will never be successful. You can have all the acts of worship in, but without the Tawheed, you will never be successful.
And that makes it the most important, because if it's the opposite, you have a Tawheed and you don't have those other ones, you can be successful. That shows you it's the most important. Plus the Anbiya, the prophets and messengers, they what? They focused on this. They began with this, and throughout their calls, they emphasized this. They made this the most important thing, as Allah says, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. And we have appointed in every religious community a messenger proclaiming there's no deity, worship Allah alone and shun the false deities. They all call to what? A Tawheed. Showing that what is the most important thing. Otherwise, if there's something more important, they would have called to that. Okay, number 2.
It's very important for your needs to be accepted.
Ahsan.
So for everything to be accepted, you have to have Tawheed.
Ahsan. As Allah says, وَلَقَدْ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ وَإِلَى الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكَ لَئِن
قل إنما أنا بشر مثلكم يوحى إلي إنما إلهكم إله واحد فمن كان يرجو لقاء ربي فليعمل عملا
صالحا ولا يشرك
بعبادة ربه أحدا.
أحسنت. Give me some. What else did we say as far as why it's important? Why this topic is important?
It's under attack.
It's under attack. It's under siege. And we gave the example of the person who said basically that you could worship people dead in the graves, and as long as you have a good intention, you have the right intention, you won't be a mushrik, or you won't be committing shirk. Be careful, you won't be committing an act of shirk. And we mentioned one more, and that was
we remind ourselves we remember in the grave.
Ahsan, we remind ourselves because these fundamentals are what we're going to be asked about. Ahsan, jazakallah khair. All right, then we mentioned the shubha. We mentioned the person who said, if you worship the people dead in the grave, it's okay as long as you have the right intention, because the Prophet said, innamal a'malu binniyat. If you don't think they have godlike powers and you don't take them as a deity, you don't intend to deify them, then you haven't committed a shirk. How do we respond to that? How would you respond to that? Give me one response to that.
How are they going to fulfill your request?
How are they going to fulfill my request?
Without the powers.
Without some type of connection between them. They would have to do it with the ability to say be and it is, or to will or speak something into existence, which is what? A godlike power. A person can believe, they can demonstrate that they believe that someone has godlike powers through their what? Through their actions. The fact that you're asking them shows that you believe that what? They have the ability to speak or will whatever you want into existence. That's one indication. Who can answer something else? I want somebody who didn't speak it. Who can give me another answer? Tafadhal, Mustafa.
How can they hear you?
How can they hear you? And if they can hear me, regardless of the distance between my voice and their ears, what am I saying? That they have godlike powers, which is what? The ability to what? To hear everything. You guys see that? So these are 2 responses, and we gave 2 others. Let's see what else that we mentioned. Okay, you got to explain it. You have to explain this, Muhammad. Explain how the hadith of Adi ibn Hatim shows that this is wrong.
Yeah, because they accepted these rabbis or priests or whatever to make what's halal haram and what's haram halal.
And did they do that intentionally? Did they intend to worship them?
No. The people didn't. Yeah, the people did not. They just followed.
But when they did that,
it's called the
it still was what? Shirk. Even though they didn't intend to do it. So just by giving something which is the entitlement, exclusive right of Allah to other than Allah, that's called what? Shirk, whether you intend it or not. So when the person says, oh, it depends on your intention, we say that's wrong. If you offer sarfu ibadah li ghayrillah, shirkun, sawa'an nawaita aw lam tanwi. Whether you intend or you don't intend, if you offer act of worship of Allah, that's an act of shirk. Whether or not you're mushrik or not is a different discussion. We'll talk about that at another time. But the last thing we talked about was a shubha. Well, actually, define a Tawheed. Give me the definition of Tawheed. Someone who hasn't spoken. Who can define a Tawheed for us in language, just in language. In the Arabic language, what's a Tawheed? Okay, but in Arabic, what is it? What is the meaning of wahada yuwahidu, which is the verb that it's derived from? No, not Islamically, just in language. To make something singular. Wahada yuwahidu means to make something singular or to make it one. In the Islamic terminology of Tawheed, we said it is somebody saying it under their voice. Okay, the oneness of Allah is not bad, but there's a technical definition. There's a reason why we give that technical definition. We said it is singling Allah out and making him the sole recipient of everything which is exclusive to him. Singling out Allah. This definition is so important for our studies. Singling out Allah and making him the sole recipient of everything which is specific to him. Then we mentioned, and we're going to close with this, a shubha. We mentioned a dubious assertion, spacious argument, something that people say about a Tawheed. They say this is something, this Tawheed that you guys have come up with, it is something that you guys made up. Latter-day scholars made this up. There's no basis for it whatsoever. Who's going to respond to that? We gave 5 responses to that. Who can give me one response? It's in the hadith. What hadith? Anybody remember the hadith? At-Tirmidhi collected it from Jabir ibn Abdullah when the Prophet said, يُعَذَّبُ نَاسٌ مِنْ أَهْلِ التَّوْحِيدِ فِي النَّارِ حَتَّى يَكُونُوا أُمَمًا. Right? He said that some people from Ahl al-Tawheed will be punished in the hellfire and burned until they are like burnt coal. Right? What word did the Prophet use? At-Tawheed. They say there's no basis for the Quran and Hadith, and we find a Hadith where the Prophet actually said at-Tawheed. Sahih Hadith. طيب, it's also where the Prophet used it in this way. He used it as a verbal noun.
Hadith
Mu'ad, when the Prophet said أَن يُوَحِّدُ using the verb. That's number 2. What was the third answer to the shubha?
The companions use it.
The companions use it. Which 2 companions did we mention? Ibn Abbas and Jabir. In the famous hadith of the Prophet describing the Prophet's farewell pilgrimage. And last but not least, what was the 5th one? The 4th one was, it's throughout the Quran, the concept. And the concept is undeniable. And we can split hairs about the term, but what really matters is the concept is something undeniable and something which it is the Quran, let alone the Quran is full of it, it is the Quran. And then last but not least, number 5 we said was what? Who mentioned it? The scholars throughout history. Without nakir, without a single person who contended and said, no, this shouldn't be said, this shouldn't be used, this term is innovated, etc. They've accepted it throughout history, so who are we to reject it? We'll stop there. We'll pick it up, inshallah ta'ala, from next week. Any questions? Any questions or comments or issues with what we covered? Going once? Are you guys sure you got it? Everything we covered is clear. All right. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.